This is Jed Disler, and welcome to The Piano Maven, your friendly podcast guide to piano recordings. Please consider subscribing to The Piano Maven through my Substack page, and I've posted a link in our episode description where you can do just that. In our first season, I started a little mini-series discussing the big box sets devoted to the Italian pianist Arturo Benedetti Michelangeli. I did a podcast episode about his complete Warner Classics recordings box set, and also this box set that came out on the long discontinued Aura label, which was mostly live material that has been bootlegged over and over and over again. But somehow I put off talking about the complete recordings for Deutsche Grammophon box set with Michelangeli. Now, there was a slimline box set that came out on Deutsche Grammophon in 2003, which contained this pianist's complete recordings for Deutsche Grammophon. But the box set that I'm talking about now for this podcast is basically an original jacket repackaging of that 2003 release, but it has two additional discs. One of the discs was a release that came out in 2009 containing a live 1984 performance of the Schumann Concerto with Daniel Barenboim conducting. And the other disc in this collection is Michelangeli's 1964 recital for the Decca label with works of Scarlatti, Galuppi, and Beethoven. This was his only recording for Decca, but since Decca is part of the Universal group of labels, it just makes sense for that to be in this complete Michelangeli Deutsche Grammophon recordings box. So we'll talk about these two discs first. Despite some moments of rather tenuous soloist orchestra coordination, the Schumann Concerto, this 1984 performance, stands out mainly for Michelangeli's tonal control and very stentorian rhetoric, complete with his famous left-hand anticipations a la Cortot or Paderewski. It's a fine performance of, the Michelangeli style of how he played the Schumann Concerto, but there are more incisive and polished Michelangeli Schumann concertos kicking around. For instance, the 1942 Telefunken studio version. There's also a live 1962 Rome radio broadcast, and both of these are in that Warner Recordings Michelangeli box. And coupled with the Schumann Concerto with Barenboim are 4 out of the 6 Debussy Images, and these were recorded in 1982, kind of on the fly during a sound check, prior to Michelangeli taping the Ravel G Major Concerto for French television, and they were not intended to be released. But these are really cool performances because Michelangeli's playing is freer and a little more animated than in his very pristinely contained 1970 Deutsche Grammophon studio versions, which I'll be talking about in a little bit. The Decca Michelangeli album is both pianistically miraculous, to my ears at least, and musically controversial. And throughout Beethoven's Opus 111 Sonata, that's the last of the Beethoven sonatas, number 32 in C minor, Michelangeli does all kinds of old-fashioned holdbacks and taperings with phrases, and he desynchronizes his hands a lot. And so much of what he does really runs contrary to the composer's very tautly linear aesthetic, yet his tonal gradations and very specifically worked out balances between the hands and really meticulous articulation are pure Michelangeli, even if they're not pure Beethoven. And I find this recording really fascinating, and I really get a lot from it. It may not be the Opus 111 of Paulini or Annie Fisher, but on its own terms, I think it's quite compelling. And there are 3 Scarlatti sonatas that are just ravishingly calibrated and cold as ice. And the Galuppi Sonata number 5 has just amazingly refined fingerwork. And as you're listening, you notice the piano playing much more than the music, because I think this is a really uninteresting piece of music, to be honest. Michelangeli recorded on again and off again for Deutsche Grammophon between 1970 and 1990. There was just one interruption, actually. In the mid-70s, he made 2 recordings for EMI. One disc had 2 Haydn concertos, and then the other disc had the most charmless and ice cold and like totally embalmed kind of performance you'll ever hear of the Schumann Carnival. Eek. Now, charmless and ice cold are about the nicest things that one can say about his Deutsche Grammophon Mozart concerto recordings of numbers 13, 15, 20, and 25. And these were his last recordings for the label, I believe. But, the abstract perfection of the pianism holds a kind of fascination, maybe some would say morbid fascination, but I'm still fascinated, I have to say. Now, his live Beethoven concertos, numbers 1, 3, and 5, The Emperor, with Carlo Maria Giannini conducting the Vienna Symphony, are admittedly sort of an acquired taste, but I think they're more convincing than the Mozart's interpretations. But I used the word embalming before, and that totally applies to Michelangeli's 1970 recording of the Beethoven Sonata number 4 in E-flat, Opus 7. I mean, it is so unspontaneous. It is so detailed in a way where there's just no life at all to the playing. There are a few live performances of him playing this piece which are just as deliberate, but they have a little more life to them. But I've never really liked this studio recording. And there's a Chopin recital disc here too that has 10 mazurkas, and I kind of like the thrown-away quality of Michelangeli's phrasing in these mazurkas. Very interesting details, but I find his accounts of the G minor ballade and the B-flat minor scherzo kind of fragmented and not very spontaneous, and all poetry kind of goes out the window. There are live performances that I think are a little bit better. But he does play the Chopin C-sharp minor prelude, opus 45, wonderfully well. It's a very austere yet full-bodied interpretation, and it kind of makes you think about this music's textural kinship to Brahms in certain ways. Actually, Michelangeli's Brahms on Deutsche Grammophon, he recorded the Opus 10 Ballades, and I think these count among his finest studio recordings. This was originally coupled with a large-scaled and rather unsmiling and not terribly lyrical account of Schubert's A minor sonata, Deutsch number 537. There's a disc that contains 2 Schumann works that stem from a 1957 BBC broadcast, and I guess Deutsche Grammophon was able to license it from the BBC, and they've retained the license from what I understand. Of these 2 performances, I prefer a really fervent rendition of the Faschingsschwank aus Wien, opus 26, to the relatively brusque and kind of unsmiling Carnival, opus 9, although this Carnival is a zillion times better than that mid-70s EMI studio version. Now, when it comes to Debussy, however, there is no disputing Michelangeli's multi-leveled mastery. And his 1970 accounts of the Image books 1 and 2 belong in every serious record collection. And, even some of his famous left-hand anticipations managed not to distract in this music. Now, Reflet dans l'eau is just a remarkable performance, and those fast runs at the beginning of the piece that go up and down the keyboard in the right hand, you will notice that he does not have to compromise or slow down to get all the notes. He is absolutely in tempo, and the tonal application and the phrasing, it just beggars belief. And also in Mouvement, Michelangeli is one of the few pianists on record who really gets Debussy's accents right. For instance, in the opening, well, I'm not singing it very well, and I don't know if I was keeping such strict rhythm, and I was exaggerating the fourth beat accent. But a lot of pianists tend to be very casual, that kind of detail. But Michelangeli not only observes the accent, but he does so uniformly and meticulously, and all of the textures and the balances are just worked out to the proverbial nines. It's quite a performance. And the Image Book 2 are just as amazing. And there are some pedal effects in Poisson d'Or, the goldfish, where he will put the pedal down for a certain part of the phrase, and then at the very end of the phrase, he takes the pedal off. So you have this little moment of dryness, and it kind of hits you in the face. It's very scintillating. He does something similar at one of the climax points in Reflet dans l'eau, actually. And it kind of reminds me of Art Tatum. I don't know why I'm thinking like that, but there's just that crispness and lightness, but also incredible concentration and focus. Now, let's talk about Michelangeli's recordings of the Debussy preludes. He did the Preludes Book 1 in the late 1970s. I've never really loved these recordings. I think I respect them more than I love them. Somehow there's a kind of aloofness that doesn't allow the inherent delicacy and simplicity in selections such as Le Vent dans la Plaine or The Footprints in the Snow or The Girl with the Flaxen Hair to really come across. And even The Sunken Cathedral seems less shimmering than kind of static in this recording. There is a video of Michelangeli playing the Preludes Book 1, which is stylistically similar, but I think it has a little more animation to it. But I would also say similar things about the Preludes Book 2, which I think were recorded in 1988. Look, Michelangeli knows exactly what he wants to do and how to do it. But honestly, if you like this kind of calculated precision in the Debussy preludes, I find a little bit more warmth and mobility in Christian Zimmermann's recordings for Deutsche Grammophon, which I think are stylistically a little bit similar, but, as I said, warmer and a little more mobile. The original 2003 Michelangeli Deutsche Grammophon box set that I mentioned earlier had a really excellent and informative biographical essay by Jeremy Siepman, but it's been replaced in this complete Deutsche Grammophon album collection with personal reminiscences by Cord Garben, who produced many of Michelangeli's Deutsche Grammophon recordings, and he also conducted the 4 Mozart concertos in this box. And there are some rehearsals that you can find on YouTube where basically Michelangeli is yelling at Cord Garben to, hey, tell them what you want, or I can't remember exactly what it is, but he's giving his conductor a hard time. Let's just put it that way. So while one might not sympathize with all of Michelangeli's interpretive conceptions, there is no disputing his immense authority and his unique keyboard voice. So if you don't have any of these recordings, or maybe you only just have one or two, this really is a box set worth getting. And, maybe the Mozart, you'll dip into it every now and then. It's not going to be your reference Mozart, but definitely the Debussy Image, the Brahms Ballades, the Schumann pieces, and the Beethoven concertos with Giulini. So a lot of really absorbing stuff here. This is Jed Disler, and you've been listening to The Piano Maven, your friendly podcast guide to piano recordings. And thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope that you will tune in to the next episode, and I look forward to being together with you for that. Take good care.